Yes, everybody, welcome back to Talking Wolves. Welcome back to a new update video on the channel. Lots of pieces of news to get into today, including a big update, or big podcast, I should say, from Jeff Shee, completely out of the blue, that was released yesterday. I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on that. I could probably do a standalone video on that, to be completely honest, but because there's so much to get into. But I'll be giving my thoughts on that. And of course, we'll get into the latest transfer news and rumours as well. But before we kick off with that, a big shout out to our channel partners for today's video, Seatfrog. Now, whether you travel on the train for work, you've got some plans booked in for the summer, or whether you use the train line for match days, Seatfrog is the app that helps you upgrade your standard class train tickets to first class for up to 60% off. So you can obviously enjoy your complimentary food and drink, free Wi-Fi, and a lot more legroom for less. Of course, you can book your standard train tickets on there as well with no booking fees. And for Talking Wolves subscribers, we have got a special offer. If you use the code WOLVESFROG, which is on the screen here, you will get £3 off your first purchase on the app. So that's Seatfrog. Download the app and use that code WOLVESFROG for £3 off your first purchase. Who doesn't love first class, eh? Well, let's talk about Jeff Shee and his podcast. It's been sort of a huge talking point over the last 24 hours or so. I remember I was about to leave work yesterday, and the guys at the Business in Sport podcast DM'd me. And I was really intrigued by this, because we don't see a hell of a lot of communication from Jeff Shee anyway. But to see a video, like a video and him sat there talking for that length of time, was really, really intriguing. Now, what I will say before I make any of my notes, because I was daft enough to watch this twice. I watched it last night, and I spent this morning watching it as well. What I will say is that you guys know, people watch this channel know that I'm, in my opinion, very fair, pretty sensible. So please, I've gone into this podcast with a completely clear mind, whereas I've no doubt many of you watching it are still so frustrated with what is happening at Wolves, frustrated with the ownership, and I do think that has been reflected by what a lot of people are saying online now. But I'll talk about the main points from it, because I know a lot of you will either don't want to or won't have the time to listen to Jeff Shee ramble on for nearly 90 minutes anyway. And I'll sort of try and go along in chronological order in how we discussed it on the podcast anyway. Firstly, talking about the purchase of Wolverhampton Wanderers. It's actually said that they had quite decent talks with West Bromwich Albion beforehand. West Brom were in the Premier League at the time. Fosun just didn't feel it was the right value for money to buy West Bromwich Albion, and obviously came across Wolves and had really productive talks with Steve Morgan, and obviously they ended up purchasing the club from Steve Morgan. And Jeff Shee has labelled the first season at the club, the 2016-2017 season, as a nightmare. And throughout this podcast, there was a sort of a theme of Jeff sort of holding his hands up to mistakes that the club have made over time. But he said that first season, if you remember, started off with Walter Zenga, ended up getting Paul Lambert in. Everything was very rushed, very last minute. But Jeff Shee has admitted that he didn't have enough knowledge of Wolverhampton Wanderers and enough knowledge of football and how a football club works that year. And obviously Wolves just about stayed up in the end under Paul Lambert before moving him on to get Nuno. But the turnaround was so tight. I think Fosun didn't take over till it was mid-July, I think. And in terms of a football team, that is pretty late in the day, really. They did talk. He talked about recruitment a little bit as well. Talked about how it works with Wolves signing players, and obviously the recruitment team and then the head coach will all come up with a few different targets for each position, and then it's up to both parties to then look at that, including Jeff, I assume, because he'll probably have to sign these deals off. They'll have to look at that and say, yes, that's fine. And basically they won't go on to sign a player until both parties have said yes to a specific player. Now, there were brief mentions of the leadership group that Jeff Shee has put together this summer. I spoke about that a week or two ago. Obviously, Domenico Tetti heading that up now with the departure of Matt Hobbs. And what Jeff Shee feels that it's going to add more stability and sustainability for the foreseeable future and at the long run at the club as well. It's interesting because I think he was pretty... Obviously, I'm going to paraphrase some of the stuff that he was saying, but I think what Jeff Shee really wanted to say is that he at the moment is the person that is making everything tick at the club. Some fans might not like that, but ultimately he said over the last couple of years he spent less time at Wolves, and things, in his opinion, and to be fair, it's right, haven't really gone to plan. So he said since December he spent every day in Wolverhampton, and to be fair to him, obviously Vital came in and has had a massive difference. Things have started to go in the right way a little bit more. So I think he's realised that when players and when staff members go to Compton, there needs to be the big boy there. There needs to be the main guy there to report to, or to have a boss there. And I think long term, that's potentially what Domenico Tetti will bring. Obviously, it will allow Jeff to have a little bit more flexibility. He sort of openly admitted his interest was more in the sort of entertainment industry. Gaming, he mentioned a lot, films, TV, and so on. So I think Wolves have probably needed it since day one, a proper sporting director, a proper almost CEO type that can go and be the go-to man and be the sort of the big boy at Compton. And at the moment, Jeff Shee feels it's him, which again, I don't know if he's a bit big-headed or if that is genuinely the truth anyway. But he admits that he made that mistake of moving away and spending less time in Wolverhampton. He has sort of appreciated that Wolves, have failed over the last few years as such. And there were just little comments he made. It sounds like there's going to be a reset. They want to start again. They want to find their mojo again. Whether that means just with the leadership group, he wants to build something there, or whether he does mean on the football pitch as well. However, he's very quick to add that obviously this has been the most successful term in the top flight for Wolverhampton Wanderers since the 70s. So, he was very quick to back himself and Fosun up as well. And then they went on to talk about the Nuno days. And to be fair to the guys that were interviewing, they did a really good job of getting some really good insight out of Jeff Shee in terms of the Nuno days. I wasn't 100% sure of Jeff's comments on this. He said when Wolves got promoted, the team and the club were very unstable. He thinks Nuno and the team got very lucky at times. And he admits the club probably didn't have the right people around Nuno to achieve things long term. But that's why, again, he mentioned the leadership team, because he wants to almost rebuild the foundations of the club from this summer onwards. But yeah, the term got lucky didn't really sit right with me, to be honest. And obviously, I think maybe some bitterness towards Nuno, but I think as well he did appreciate that maybe they didn't support Nuno enough towards the latter stages of his time at the football club as well. Now the things that probably wound fans up more was obviously about the money and spending money. He doesn't believe that Wolves will have to spend massive amounts of money to succeed. Again, I've seen clips of that and it's been taken completely out of context. I think when you watch the full podcast, you appreciate what he's saying a little bit more. But he doesn't believe Wolves will have to spend massively. They can spend within the budgets that they've got to continue growing as a football club. And he believes that success can be made within those budgets. That's quite an interesting question as well in regards to players that have been at the club. Diogo Jota was the player that Jeff Shee said that he feels was a mistake to sell. He said at the time, he went to Nuno and said, we're probably going to have to move somebody on. Diogo, Adama, and Nuno said, well, I want to keep Adama. So Diogo Jota was moved on. But again, Jeff Shee, to his credit, said that Diogo Jota at the time, in and out of the squad with injuries, out of form a little bit. So probably was at the time the right decision maybe to move him on. And he did label Patrick Atrone as the worst signing that they've made so far. A lot of people mentioning, why have you not said Fabio Silva? I think long term that will probably be his answer. But of course, Fabio's still under contract at Wolverhampton Wanderers, so I don't think he'd be throwing him under the bus. Said Patrick Atrone mainly because his character and his style of play didn't really fit in to the English game and didn't fit in at Wolves at all. In terms of the growth of the football club, a lot of it was towards how Jeff Shee wants to grow Wolves and what can be done to grow Wolverhampton Wanderers. He actually said, probably one of the, not the greatest thing he said in this, he actually said the local fans are the minority. And to a degree, yes, maybe that is the case. But also, in my opinion, the local fans are probably the ones putting in the most money into the football club. They're buying the merchandise. They're buying the season tickets. They're buying the match day tickets. Whereas I have full respect for everyone in America, Australia, across Europe, Africa, wherever you're watching Wolves. But in my opinion, yes, you will buy merchandise, but are you putting in the hundreds and thousands that a lot of fans are to watch the team home and away directly to the club? No, I don't think so. So I think everyone should be on a fair playing field, and it was a little bit disrespectful, in my opinion, the way that he was talking about the local fans. And I think that's probably why there's a lot of upset people on social media from what I'm seeing as well. Of course, esports was mentioned, but to be fair, again, to Jeff Shee, he was saying he needs to look outside of the box a little bit in regards to what revenue streams Wolves can use to help grow the club. Because if they're just using things internally in England, it's the same sources that the likes of Everton and Fulham and whoever are going to be using to help grow their club. So esports has been an interesting one. He says that esports will be funding itself long term. It's no money is going to be coming out of the football club, which I think is important to note, because a lot of fans get really wound up about the whole esports thing. But I think it's very fair to say that long term, that's what he wants. He wants the esports just to fund itself. And yeah, he wants to branch out to continue expanding the Wolves empire as well. Molyneux was also mentioned as well, and again, I think he was just very sensible in his comments, in my opinion. Reckons the ceiling for the attendance at Wolves is probably sort of between the 35,000 and 40,000 mark, which is more than fair for me. I think if you go towards the 50,000 mark, you're not going to sell out Wolverhampton. I love Wolves. I think it's a massive club, but I'd rather have a full stadium than 5 to 10,000 empty seats every week. Talks about the Steve Bull. He recognises that's the oldest stand at the club. It needs some major renovation. Talks about the hospitality side of things, again, which has wound up a lot of people on social media, in my opinion, taken out of context a little bit as well. I think from day one, when Fosun drew up those plans for Molyneux, everyone was so excited. And I just think at that time, because that was a similar time the comments were made about us rivaling Man City. And I just think Fosun, after one really successful year, got really overexcited. And I think Jeff Shee is probably, would take back a lot of those words at the moment. But at the time when they were talking about that Molyneux, hospitality was one of the biggest things that they were mentioning. I remember the Steve Bull stand, they were saying about hospitality loads. But obviously because we were winning games, no one was really that fussed. But I think the Steve Bull stand needs a renovation. Hospitality is another revenue to add more money into the club. So I don't think people will lose their season tickets over it, which I've seen mentioned. People will still stay in the Steve Bull stand. But I think everyone's desperate to see a little bit of renovation, a little bit of work being put into Molyneux as well. And of course, the Wolves women situation, that was addressed. He broke his silence on that a little bit as well. Main thing was really that Jeff Shee, again, there was no real apology or why he did what he did, but he's really not happy with the decision makers in the leagues above where Wolves women are right now. He believes the leagues are expecting the women's clubs to heavily lean on the men's game still, which Jeff Shee isn't 100% a fan of. He believes that the Wolves women team should be its own identity, as every women's team does. And he said the girls that play for the women's team probably don't want to be leaning on the men for financial help either. So he believes that there still needs to be conversations on different avenues to grow the women's game as well. He did end that segment, in my opinion, a little bit negatively in terms of he still has reservations about the long term of Wolves women. I think he sort of tried to cushion it by saying, yeah, I've got a team, I want to win, I want to get promoted. But then he sort of admitted, I don't really want to be spending huge amounts of money on a playing squad if we get promoted. So it's an interesting situation regarding the Wolves women's team. I don't think it would have been a particularly fantastic listen for those fans of that side of the thing. And minority investors, still something that Fosun are looking into at the moment. Wants them really to specialise in a certain area. Are they going to help renovate the stadium? Are they going to add expertise in certain areas? Are they going to add hospitality and hotels in certain areas of Wolverhampton just to grow the club and grow the city? Didn't give a valuation. One of the interviewers asked, what is Wolves valued at? What would you sell it at? And Jeff Shee refused to give a flat fee, but in his opinion, we are as big or if not bigger than Crystal Palace. And if you use some of the valuations that have been going around online when I had a little look earlier on, you're going to be looking around the £500 million plus mark, which probably isn't too far. Maybe a little bit higher than I expect, but probably not too far away from a valuation if I looked into everything anyway. But what I've gauged from it really is that Jeff Shi obviously wants to grow Wolves, but wants to grow it sensibly. That's what he said. He cleared up some comments that he made last year about, if you want to support Wolves, maybe not. Again, I don't know the exact quote. Don't expect trophies, don't expect European football. Because what he doesn't want to do is promise all this stuff, and we're then expecting Fosun to be piling in millions, hundreds of millions, billions of pounds of money, because it just sounds like they don't want to do that anymore. Which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just on about being sensible, and I think that's what they're going to try and do now, do their business sensibly. We've seen clubs like Brighton do it, and it's worked. And I've mentioned it many times before with this self-sustainability thing. Long term, it will work, but you have to give it time to start off and work. And this summer is quite big for it, but I think if you can flip the Cunha Aït-Nouri money and bring in 4 or 5 decent players, maybe that could be the key. But like I said, I've tried to take the positives out of it. Obviously, there's some things there that I've pointed out. Maybe I'm being a lot fairer on Jeff than a lot of you guys will be. But I'm trying to squeeze some of the positive juices out of that podcast rather than being just completely negative. There's nothing in that I thought, wow, I cannot believe he said that. There's some stuff that is disappointing, but I went into that with a fresh mind, and I went into that thinking, I know he's not going to say, oh, I've got 500 million that we're going to spend on players this summer. It was a business podcast. He was going to talk about business, how he's kept Wolves afloat, I suppose. So that's how I took it. I went into that sensibly, and that's sort of what I've come out of it with, really. And apologies if I've rambled on about that podcast longer than expected. I probably should have done its own video on that, but we'll quickly jump into the transfer news as well. We have had news today that Nasser Djiga is in talks with Scottish club Rangers to potentially join them on loan this summer. It's likely to be a straight loan deal, of course. No option to buy. Joined Wolves in January's game time has been very few and far between, really. It's said that at the moment Wolves have no plan to directly replace Nasser Djiga. They still want to bring in a centre-back, but it's going to be a left-footed centre-back to compete with Totti. So, I think that's fair at the moment. I think without Djiga, we'll have 5 centre-backs. I think you bring in another one, that's 6. You're covered for every position. So I think he needs game time. Rangers going to be competing towards the top end of the table, going to be competing in European football, hopefully winning games, having lots of the ball. I think this could be a worthwhile loan move for Wolves. And a lot of Wolves fans also mentioned, I wonder if this is a sweetener in any potential deal for Raskin, who's a central midfielder currently playing for Rangers that I mentioned a week or so ago. Would be interesting to see if that has any bearing on that potential deal or not. We had news from Turkey yesterday in regards to Christopher Wu, currently playing for Stade de Rennes in France. Apparently the player is potentially expecting an offer from the club. He was set to move to the Turkish club Trabzonspor, but their president revealed that the player wants to move to England and is currently negotiating with a Premier League club. One of the sources in Turkey suggested that club was Wolves. Again, you know what my thoughts are sometimes on the legitimacy of these Turkish sources, but Christopher Wu, could he be the player to join Wolves? I'm going to very quickly search, actually, if he's a left-footed centre-back, because I have no doubt that is probably the market that Wolves want to look at. He's a right-footed centre-back, so I'm not too sure 100% on that one. Another centre-back that was linked yesterday, who is a right-footed centre-back as well, because I searched that up earlier on, is Thomas Christiansen, currently playing for Udinese. Wolves apparently bid for him in January, around £12 million, which was knocked back. But Wolves, Bournemouth and Como, again in Italy, are reportedly linked with him. So we'll see. Very tall defender, but again, right-footed, so is he going to be fitting the bill that Vitor Pereira wants on that left-hand side of the defence? Fabio Silva, we have had an update on him as well. Looks like RB Leipzig and Borussia Dortmund are currently leading the race for him. Other clubs in Spain and Italy are also said to be interested in Fabio Silva. However, at the moment, there is a little bit of a roadblock in negotiations. That's because Wolves have tasked Jorge Mendes and Gestifute with sorting this deal out. And of course, Fabio Silva, I think he used to have his own, his dad as his agent. But with Jorge Mendes and Gestafe involved, there's more money to pay. And some of these clubs don't necessarily want to deal with a third party and part with more money. So at the moment, there is a little bit of a stall in negotiations that are frustrating, obviously, Wolves and Gestafe. But ultimately, I don't blame them. If these clubs want to buy a player, why do they have to deal with Jorge Mendes and Gestafe to get the deal done? I don't know. So we'll wait and see on Fabio Silva. No doubt he will be leaving the club. But at the moment, the talks are stalling a little bit. And again, I'm sure Wolves will want to try and get this one done sooner rather than later because there's some decent money there to be had, I'm sure. And then finally, some news, a little bit historical, I suppose. Well, maybe not that historical. But sports over in Spain had been talking about the Sport Recife defensive midfielder Zay Lucas, 17 years of age. He's been heavily linked with Barcelona in recent days. Barcelona are not pursuing a deal to sign the young man, but it was said in an article today that Wolves had bid for him previously around £12.5 million back, €12.5 million, sorry, I should say, back in April, which the Brazilian club turned away. Thought that they value him at around €15 million. So we'll see long term if it's a player that Wolves do go back in for. I don't think necessarily that should be a deal that Wolves are pursuing urgently. But again, maybe later on this summer we do go in and revisit that deal perhaps. But that may have been a Matt Hobbs negotiation or a Matt Hobbs deal. We don't know. But guys, that is all for today. Apologies if I rambled on a little bit too much on the Jeff Shee saga. But yeah, like I said, maybe I'm being very fair or too fair on Jeff Shee. But I just thought a lot of people took that podcast out of context. I thought it was there, said and did what I expected, really. I didn't really expect much more. I didn't really expect much less from the podcast, to be honest. But it was just, I suppose, fairly satisfying and worthwhile to just see Jeff Shee actually sit there and talk like a real person rather than riddles across some articles that we've seen from him over the last 12 to 18 months. But as always, guys, if you enjoyed it today, be sure to hit the like button down below. Make sure you go and check out Seat Frog with the discount code in the description down below. I will leave the link for Jeff Shee's podcast in the description as well if you want to go and listen to that or watch that over on YouTube. And as always, guys, look after yourselves. I'll see you on the next one.